But then immediately, I felt this otherworldly presence that blew me away, because I had the feeling of not just this peace that permeated me. It was almost like it's strange, but almost like time stood still. It was almost like I
Oh
was in
my
a
gosh.
bubble, but
Wow.
I felt these arms wrap around me and sort of pull me into what the best I can describe as like an invisible bosom. And I knew then that there was a spiritual realm, and somehow somebody from that realm heard my silent prayer and answered it. And
Wow.
I was not expecting that to happen,
That
but
gave
it
me goosebumps. Hi, I'm Yegi. I'm an entrepreneur and success coach who wants it all: family, luxury, career, and the freedom to do whatever I want whenever I want. And I'll do whatever it takes to get there. I created the Yegi Project to document my journey and inspire others to do the same. My mission is to change the world by influencing and leading others to do what they love and live fulfilled lives. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the Yegi Project. Today's honored guest is Dr. Thomas McCormack, who is a specialist and an expert as a psychiatrist, educator, and a thought leader in the integration of spirituality and medicine. In today's world, mixing those two is more talked about than ever. And I'm very curious to pick his brain from his decades of experience and research into the topic. So without further ado, Dr. McCormack, please tell us, who are you and what do you do today?
well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. My name's Tom McCormack, and I'm a physician. I had my medical training at Emory University for medical school. Then I went into psychiatry and did psychiatry residency and 2 fellowships at Duke University Medical Center. And after that, went into private practice in Athens, Georgia, where I live currently. Been doing that since 2002, and this is home for us.
Are you still running the practice?
I am. I started the practice from nothing, just little old me. I rented a small 10 by 10 office in another doctor's building, and grew from there to where we're now in about a 5,500 square foot building that's completely full. I have 5 advanced practice providers along with me. I have 2 psychotherapists here as well, and we do all kinds of multidisciplinary psychiatric care.
Wow, that's excellent. I mean, it takes a lot to be an expert in an area, but also an entrepreneur to do that side of it. It takes a special type of person to be able to grow to that extent. Our audience are entrepreneurs who really care about their health and wellness. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey so they can understand you as an entrepreneur as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. In medical school, they teach you nothing about business or starting a business or being an entrepreneur. In fact, it's sort of frowned upon. A lot of times, these folks tend to be in their ivory tower, and they think of science and learning as the top thing. And anyway, it's just not important for most medical schools. And so most docs get out and they become employed by somebody, and nothing inherently wrong with that, except in what's happened in the 21st century is with these companies that are buying up practices and trying to make money, which of course I have no problem with that. But doctors are becoming increasingly less able to run their own practice and make their own decisions as far as how many patients to see, how much time to spend with patients, how to treat their patients, because a lot of these decisions are taken out of their hands and have to do with the bottom line and making money for
Yeah.
their employer. And I didn't want to practice like that. I wanted the freedom. I think that came from my dad, who practiced as a dentist. Excuse me, growing up in Atlanta, and he had his own small practice. And just seeing him have the freedom and be able to run his practice and practice dentistry the way he wanted to, the way he thought was best, I thought was neat. And psychiatry is one of the few specialties really in medicine that still affords folks that opportunity.
Of course, because without that, you really lose your vision and values if somebody's just controlling the bottom line. And ultimately, businesses like that fail. They could be profitable for a couple of years, but from my experience and research, businesses ultimately fail, change, or literally that's why there's the 5-year exit plan in most big business
Sure.
decisions. Anyways, that's a whole other topic. But what really caught my attention is a new term that I saw on your bio. And I
Mhm.
wanted to know what that is. So you are integrating spirituality and medicine, and that is a topic I love. I'm a person who doesn't like to take medicine, but loves to, of course, take it if that's my last option because I
Right.
don't know what side effects it has. So that's me personally.
Right.
But lately, I've also been getting into spirituality as far as, a lot of people, law of attraction or believing that there's something higher. In general, for a long time, most people have believed in some sort of God, but it's being talked about more in today and putting it in terms like the universe. So more people are open to hearing about spirituality. In my
Mhm.
opinion, it's ultimately the same thing defined in different ways. But I wanted to know, what do you mean by integrating spirituality and medicine to have a more holistic view on today's healthcare?
Yeah, well, I'll start from the start. I was a skeptic and agnostic, really didn't care about spirituality at all and was living my life, honestly, as a young man, pretty selfishly for myself. And came to have an encounter with, supernatural encounter that changed my perspective on things. And I knew then that there was a spiritual realm, and somehow somebody from that realm heard my silent prayer and answered it. And
Wow,
I was not expecting that to,
that
but
gave
it
me goosebumps. I want to know more.
yeah, I'd be happy to tell you more about it, but it did happen, and that put me on this journey of understanding that I had my own personal responsibility, as I have come to believe everybody does, to decide what he or she believes. And if you search and you decide you don't believe in anything, okay, we'll be able to back that up and say I did this, that, and the other, and that's why I don't have a belief system. But I felt that responsibility, and so I searched every single major religion in the world and got their religious texts and read them. This was my first year in medical school, so my classmates thought it was very strange. But what I do between for study breaks, I would crank out the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the Jewish Tanakh, and I'd be reading, and people would be like, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, you won't understand." But I was on a quest
Don't worry about it.
yeah, I was on a quest to find out for me who this higher power was that I had come to help me in a supernatural way.
And you didn't grow up with any religion from your family and ancestors?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I grew up a nominal Christian. We went to church, and my parents are certainly believers. Since it wasn't, I don't know, the church we went to was a little bit watered down, and I never really got much out of it. I just saw, I think God is, well, if he exists, he's up there somewhere, and he
Yeah, I
doesn't
just
really
didn't
care.
think deeply about it. It was just there.
Yeah. I treated God as a genie. If I really needed something badly, I'd fire up a prayer and, hope that he'd listen. And I'm not sure he was, but yeah, I didn't think much about it. I was more agnostic than atheist. But as I got further on in school, I wanted to be a physician from a very young age. And I decided that science was the way to knowledge. And so spirituality, theological issues really took a back seat in my mind to the ultimate knowledge, way to gain knowledge, which I felt was the natural scientific method.
I see. Now, how did you know that initially, even from a very young age, you wanted to be a physician? Did you have a calling? How did you know? Because that even just
Yeah.
knowing that is huge, I believe.
Yes, it was definitely a calling. I was probably, honestly, 3 or 4 years old. My parents tell me that from a very, very young age, I talked about wanting to be a doctor.
Oh,
And
wow.
the only thing I remember about that was there was an old 1970s television show called Emergency, and for whatever reason, the role of the doctor really resonated with me, and from a
Oh,
young age, I
wow.
started telling people I wanted to be a doctor, and it just stuck. But no, looking back, it was definitely, I think that God had planted that in my mind, that was my path in life, and he's equipped me to handle it, and I've enjoyed it. It's been wonderful.
Excellent. Now, why psychiatry? What got you to focus in that area of medicine?
Yeah. I started out medical school wanting to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. I'd worked with a
Oh,
team of heart surgeons in Atlanta prior to medical school, and I really loved it. I just thought it was neat having people's lives hang in the balance and opening up their chest cavity and dealing with their heart. It was just neat, and seeing them, people that are really on the brink of death, we could restore their heart function and give them a quality of life, and I just thought that was really neat.
yeah.
And
What
so
a
went to medical
responsibility.
school wanting to do that, and, I was a, naive 21-year-old kid or so, and I didn't realize I just went to work and I saw what the surgeons did, and I didn't take call with them or anything. I just went home at 5 o'clock when my shift was over, And when I got to medical school and realized, man, they have a different kind of lifestyle. That they're on call and they're doing these emergencies and they're called in out of their bed at night. And not only that, but the residency and training for cardiothoracic surgery is about 7 years. And it's very surgery residency is very, very rigorous. And I just started to feel, well, maybe I want something that would afford me a better lifestyle balance to be able to, medicine was not my life. It was very important to me and certainly a calling, but I wanted to have a family. At that time, I wasn't married, but I still knew I wanted to have family and kids and that was going to take precedent. And I didn't want them to suffer on account of my work. And so started thinking about something else. It was in my third year, I took a psychiatry rotation at the VA hospital, and didn't really like it a whole lot, but I kept getting positive feedback from professors that, "Hey, Tom, you're pretty good at this. Have you thought about psychiatry?" And I thought, "No, I don't know what psychiatry is." It's very strange, and I didn't get it. And so fourth year, responded to a flyer that was up on a bulletin board, and it said that they needed expert witnesses to go to the law school. The law school was having a moot court, and this was a malpractice case. So for the law students, it was actually a class that they got graded in. And so I signed up, and they paid me, I don't know, $15 or something. I thought it was $1 million. Signed up, and I was playing the role of a doctor. It was actually a surgeon who had botched the surgery. And so I was on the stand, and they were cross-examining me and that sort of thing. And I really had a great time with it, and apparently did well. On my way out to the parking lot afterwards, the judge stopped me. He said, "Hey, young man, I just want to tell you did a great job in there." I said, "Well, thank you, Your Honor." He said, "Have you ever thought about doing that for a living?" And I said, "Do what?" He said, "Do an expert witness." And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, yeah, I'll think about it. You're really good." And I got in the car and I was like, "I don't know what he's talking about." So I went to the library and looked it up. And the only
Like, oh, is that a thing?
yeah, I had no idea because we weren't taught that in medical school. And the only field I found was called forensic psychiatry. And since I kind of, started to take a little bit of liking to psychiatry, I was like, that sounds really cool. I could totally see myself doing that. And I decided that I wanted to be a psychiatrist from that point.
That's honestly great. You just took what life was offering you. You paid attention. A lot of people, I feel like, miss those cues in life. They don't pay
Mm,
attention to. They're like, nope, this was the plan. I need to stick to going back to, what I was doing. They don't stop and listen to themselves or the messages that they're getting. So
right.
it's beautiful that you're able to do that from such a young age and listen to the cues to shift gear. And now, question about that. Now, looking back, does it all connect and make sense of why things happened the way they did? The shifts?
100,000%. I mean, it totally does. Looking back, I can see God's hand in it from very young age, but even more tangibly as I got older, as I first got into medical school and then had that journey from wanting to do surgery to psychiatry. In fact, before psychiatry, I had settled on dermatology. I thought I can work with my hands and I enjoy it and I still kind of do some minor surgery. And I was working with a dermatologist at my medical school, and he really liked me. And he said, "Tom, I can get you into derm residency." But in dermatology, you had to be at the top of your class. And that was about middle of the road in medical school. And he said, "Oh, don't worry. You'll just have to take an extra year." But he said, "After that, I'll get you in." And I thought, an extra year? I don't really want to do that. And it was about that time that I learned about forensic psychiatry. So after much ado deciding to go into psychiatry, I went and told him. And my dermatology professor said, "That is the biggest mistake of your life." And I thought, "Oh
Wow.
my goodness." I was I don't know, 25-year-old young man. And I thought, there's this guy I look up to who's done this forever and is very good at it, telling me I'm making a huge mistake by going into this
Oh,
field. So there was a lot of uncertainty. Again, looking back, I feel like calling him. I actually looked him up recently. He's still practicing, but he's in his 70s. But and just telling him, "Hey, it worked out just great. Thank you very much."
I
But
love
thank
that you
goodness he was
shared that
wrong.
story. Sorry to cut you off, but I
No,
really
you're good.
love that you shared that story because a lot of people, I feel like, know what they should do next, but other people or other opinions hold them back. And it could be a huge mistake or, waste a lot of time for them to get on the path that they actually want to get at.
Hmm.
But going back to your story, I'm very curious what happened that you switched from being a skeptic to having faith and believing, having the spirituality aspect of it and joining it together in medicine.
Yeah, it started when I was in undergraduate. My first semester of my freshman year, I decided I was going to be pre-med, and I got sick just a month or so into the semester. I actually got mononucleosis, which may not sound like a big deal, but I thought it was just strep throat, pharyngitis. I had a sore throat. I was like, oh no, I kind of blew it off. Yeah, I was busy. I had biology and chemistry and a full load. By the time I finally went to the doctor, my suite mates actually kind of carried me down to student health. I had had an enlarged spleen, large liver. I'd lost a
Oh,
lot of weight. I could not swallow. I could not eat. I was so fatigued. That's why they had to kind of help me down to student health. And so I was actually hospitalized for almost 2 weeks. And
wow.
because of that, I missed a lot of class, obviously. And
Yeah, it disturbs your whole life,
it
especially
did.
as a young man trying to, be successful in school.
Yeah, it got me off track, and, my advisor said, "Tom, I think you ought to withdraw from some classes or maybe withdraw from the semester altogether." I was that sick, and I said, "No, sir, I can't do that. I'm pre-med, and I've got to stay on this track, or I'll be a year behind." And, I didn't listen to his advice, which was foolish, but he told me, he said, "Well, Tom, you're not going to medical school, so you need to make other plans." And, I said, "Well, I am gonna go to medical school." Well, the long story short is I ended up getting 2 Cs in biology and chemistry, and that's usually a death knell. If that's your first grades in science as a pre-med guy, you're done. But I told him, "I'm gonna work hard, and I'll see you in 3.5 years, and I will be going to medical school." And so the rest of the time, I worked really, really hard, almost had a 4.0, and got my GPA up and, my MCAT score up, and by the time I met with my advisor again, because he was head of the pre-med, committee, he said, "Tom, we're gonna highly recommend you to medical school, and you shouldn't have any problem getting into your state's medical school," which is great, that's where I wanted to go. And I said, "Fantastic." So I got an interview there in early October, and I had 2 interviews, and they went incredibly well, and I thought any day now is a rolling admission. I thought I was gonna get my acceptance to medical school, but it didn't happen that way. In fact, by the time graduation rolled around in May, I had not heard from them, which was unusual. Usually they'll put you on the waiting list if they're like, "He's pretty good, but we got some top-notch people over here. We'll see if something opens up. We'll
Yeah.
give them a call." They interviewed me and then just never heard from them. So I was expecting an acceptance, and since it hadn't come by that point, I was like, "What in the world's going on?" So every day, I mean, I came home and I was living at my parents' house over the summer, just hopefully going to med school. But one day I walked down to the mailbox and I checked it, and there was a thin envelope, and it was a one-line rejection. And I did not get into medical school. And so everything I'd wanted to do my entire life that I'd really worked hard to get back after initial setback in college was just taken away from me. And
Mm,
I was heartbroken. I was sad, but I was also angry. And I didn't want to go back up and tell my parents because I knew they'd be upset. So I just decided I'm going to go for a walk. I had my dog with me, and I didn't walk far. I walked to the house next door, and I stopped in the middle of the road, and I prayed this prayer. It went something like this: "What the hell? Um, I don't I don't think I even believe in you, but if you're real, you need to show me right now. This doesn't make sense. This is not fair. And who would do this to one of his children you love anyway? So I need you to show me. And I'm not saying you need to get me into medical school, but I need to know that you're real and that you have a path for me, and you need to show me that path.
give
And
me
if you do
some
that,
hope.
yeah." And I said, "If you do that, I'll follow you." And totally expected that to, nothing to happen. But then immediately I felt this otherworldly presence that blew me away, because I had the feeling of not just this peace that permeated me. It was almost like, it's strange, but almost like time stood still. It was almost like I
Oh
was in
my
a
gosh.
bubble, but
Wow.
I felt these arms wrap around me and sort of pull me into what the best I can describe as like an invisible bosom. But it was sort of, I felt enveloped
Like
by
the
love
comfort.
and comfort and peace. And I didn't get some answer audibly or anything like that, but I just
You
knew
just knew.
it was
Yeah.
gonna be
Wow.
okay. And the circumstances did not make it look like it was gonna be okay, but I just felt like it was. So I was blown away, and I ended up walking a couple of miles and came back and told my parents, and they were upset. And I remember my dad said to me, like, "How could you be so calm?" And I didn't want to say anything to him because I thought they might think I was crazy. I'd
I'm
lost my
just
mind. Yeah, I just had this invisible thing hug me, and I feel great. So what happened was my parents started working behind the scenes to see if they could get me an interview. Turned out my mom knew the dean at a newer medical school in our state. And I hadn't even applied there because they were geared toward rural medicine, and that was not what really I was interested in. And she called the dean, and he was nice enough to grant me an interview. He said, "I can't guarantee we'll, admit him, but I'd be happy to talk to him." It seemed like there was hope, and so about a week later, I got dressed up in my Sunday best, was going to drive the 100 miles down to talk to the dean, and I just had this feeling that this wasn't right. This wasn't the path. But my parents had worked hard to open this door, so I didn't want to let them down. But I kind of lingered on the couch. Finally, my mom was like, "You gotta go. You're gonna be late." And so, as I was walking to the back door, I put my hand on the doorknob and kissed my parents goodbye. The phone rang. Back then, we had phones on the wall, and so the phone on the wall rang, and my mom grabbed it as I was walking out the door and looked puzzled and said, Yes, yes, he's right here." And she put her hand over the phone and she goes, "It's for you." And I said, "Who is it?" She goes, "It's for you," and kind of thrust the phone at me. And I answered the phone, and on the other end was the dean from a med school I'd gotten waitlisted on. And he said, "This dean so and so, and I wanted to offer you a position that's opened up for our medical school class, and it starts in a week, so you don't have much time. Will you be willing to accept that?" I said, "Yes, sir." And so, my prayer had been answered in a very dramatic
Yeah,
way.
there
And
you
from that point,
go.
I knew there was something
You
there.
had your answer. Wow, that's
Mhm.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that
Yeah.
story. It gave me goosebumps as you were saying about your um um mystery hug.
Still gives me goosebumps.
I want to jump into your upcoming book. So I want to learn more about it. It really caught my attention when I read that it's Hidden Medicine is the title.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the tagline is it's a lifeline for people who have tried everything but are still suffering. So I know there are a lot of people like that out there. Can you tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book and who and what do you mean by that? So, what's the answer? So, for the people that are struggling with their health and they did try everything medically, how can this book help them?
Yeah. Now that I was on my own spiritual journey, starting medical school and kind of figuring out who that higher power was, and I came to my own decision at some point, I became intrigued that they weren't talking about spirituality at all in medical school. We talked mostly about biology, which is important. Obviously, I'm a physician. We're prescribing medicine. We need to know pharmacology. We need to know how the body works. All that's foundational. But the soul and the spirit were not discussed at all. Maybe the soul a little bit in psychiatry and stuff, but not really in other branches of medicine. And I started thinking, the only thing that makes our clientele different, the only thing that makes us different from a veterinarian is our clientele. And we're just dealing with their physical issues. And the more I started digging into it, I found a quote by Freud that I'm paraphrasing it, but he basically said, people have always known there's a spirit. It was up to me to show them that they had instincts too. Well, now it's totally changed. We know that we have a physical body and instincts, but people have really put the spirit in the 21st century in the back seat. And this always puzzled me. I started doing research and I found that there was, in fact, and there is over 3,000 studies that showed that spirituality and religion have a positive effect on coping, but also health outcomes. And this
Mm-hmm.
is just not talked about in the mainstream press, not talked about in medical school curriculum at all. And this just puzzled me as to why this wasn't the case. Part of our being, if we believe, hey, we're body, soul, and spirit, why are we totally ignoring the spiritual component to illness?
In
We're
medicine. Yeah,
in
it's
medicine,
not
right?
even. So, when you went to medical school, it was not discussed at all. It was just literally very clear this is the physical piece of the problem and this is how we solve it. But it was only physical.
Well, so at that time, they had what's called, and still today, it's called the biopsychosocial approach to medicine. And basically, what that said is in all medical tasks, whether diagnosing or treating folks, you have to think about what's going on biologically, obviously, what's going on psychologically, and then what are their social, support systems, for example. And so the way it was couched to us was that, well, religion is part of their support. If they have that and that works for them, great. You need to know what their religion is so you can say, hey, that's swell. Keep going to church or synagogue or mosque or whatever, you float your boat. But it didn't go into any of the research in that. And what I found, and I saw this in the research, but I found this in as I started seeing patients in residency, that the people that had a spiritual foundation had better coping and better health outcomes. And I started increasingly thinking, this is something I want to incorporate into my practice. I want to
Mm,
learn how to do this. And since there wasn't much guidance out there, I started, kind of going on my own and doing spiritual histories with people. And kind of meeting them where they were. That really gained ground in 2019 when my dad got Alzheimer's disease. And my dad, as I mentioned, was a dentist. He was the best man at my wedding. He's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. Just a fantastic guy. And to watch this wonderful man be robbed of his humanity and just go downhill and become a shell of a person, it was very difficult for me and obviously my siblings, and my mom was taking care of him. And then COVID hit right after that, and we were trying
Yeah.
desperately to keep him out of a nursing home. We knew he'd probably never get out. And just frankly, some of these spiritual things I started using myself. And I found that if I could come up with a systematized approach that had helped me, and I could, pass it on to patients, that could really be a beneficial thing. And that's how all this was born. And then in 2022, I had a kind of a traumatic issue with the church I was involved in and had been involved with for over 20 years. There was some what I call spiritual warfare involved, and it didn't end well. And I really doubled down on my approach and found it helpful once again. And at that point, talked with my pastor about writing a book. And we initially decided to write it together. And as we got into the process a couple months in, he turned to me and said, Tom, I think this is your book. You have something to say. And I was scared because he'd published before. I hadn't written anything since college. And I thought,
You passed down the
Dr.
torch.
Mills, yeah, I need you. And he's like, no, you got this. And so really in 2022, I started writing in earnest.
That's beautiful. Now it's getting released soon. Hopefully, by the time it'll be around the time we release this episode as well. Where can people find it?
So it's for pre-sale now on Amazon. So you can go
Okay.
ahead and order it there for folks that are interested. Obviously, it'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It'll be in brick and mortar bookstores. It'll be at Walmart, Target, and Costco, places like that
Full
as well.
force everywhere.
So it should be in most bookstores everywhere. Yeah.
That's awesome. Congratulations again. That's huge to have a book
Thank you.
published.
Yeah, I'm excited. I hope it helps a lot of people.
Yes. And there was one other term that I read, and that's what I was referring to, that I even tried to Google, and I was like, okay, wait, why is this not a thing? Is this something innovative and new that we're talking about? So I believe you pronounce it Marua
I'll take it for Ruachiatry. Right.
again.
Ruachiatry. So
Ruachiatry. Thank you
it,
so much. Sorry about that. So what is Ruachiatry? And is this something new that we're starting to talk about?
I hope so. It's I coined the term, and we'll see whether or not that takes off. But I coined it from ruach, which in Hebrew means spirit, and iatria, which in Greek means the treatment of. So again, I found there wasn't a spiritual treatment in all the field of medicine. And in fact, most doctors only talked about spiritual things or religion when patients were terminal, when they're super sick and in the hospital. They say, "Oh, well, I'll call the chaplain for you." Most doctors, and studies show this too, aren't comfortable talking about these things, which is interesting because studies have also found that patients do want to have these conversations with their providers, but providers are ill-equipped, basically based on their lack of training to know how to deal with this. So referrals are generally made on account of that. And Ruachiatry is more of a specific treatment for the spiritual aspect of disease. So you talked about earlier if people are treatment resistant. This is not something that takes the place of regular medical care. I look at it as an adjunctive. You add it on to it, right? So I'm not saying, hey,
Supplemental.
do this instead of taking medicine or getting surgery. Absolutely not. In fact, for causes of medical conditions, I assume that there's a biological underpinning. There's probably a psychological component as well, and that we need to address those fully before we start talking about the spiritual. I don't want people to think, oh, geez, there's a demon around every other corner causing illness. That's not true.
No, it's just
But
supplemental.
but some illnesses are due to, I think, malevolent spiritual factors, and some of those things are doors we open up ourselves, sometimes unwittingly and sometimes knowingly invite these things in that can negatively affect our health. So Ruachiatry
I'm
is
so
an
sorry.
attempt to
Let me pause
systematize
it.
this.
I'm so sorry. Let me pause you there. I think an
Okay.
example would really help me and the audience understand what you mean.
Okay. So an example would be treatment-resistant depression, something that I deal with in my practice as a psychiatrist very often. And I love treating people with depression. It's something that unfortunately runs my family, so that it kind of hits home to me. It's something I like to fight, and I've learned how to do it reasonably well. So people come in and they a lot of times have taken some medicine, usually from a primary care doctor, sometimes from another psychiatrist. And by the time they get to me, oftentimes they've tried a few different medicines. And so they're their depression is resistant to what we would say, hey, the usual things, right? And so we try to say, how many medicines have you been on? Were they on it long enough? Was it the right medicine? And oftentimes it is. And then we talk about psychotherapy. So, bio with the medicine, psychological. Okay, have you seen a therapist? Have you talked about your issues? If they've had trauma or things like that from their past, or other unresolved things that they may not even be aware of. But have you met with a therapist? Because that's super important as well. And if they've done those things and they're still sick, I think the question is, well, why? They're not responding to the usual standard of care treatments, and what's the reason for that? And in my experience, some of those cases are due to an unaddressed spiritual component. And this was borne out in a study that we did in our own practice. Granted, it was a small study, but it was very powerful. We did a 12-week study where we took people who had treatment-resistant depression, which we defined as at least 3 or more antidepressants that hadn't worked fully, and also folks had to be in some kind of psychotherapy as well. And we took
Mhm.
those people and said, hey, there's a spiritual treatment. Would you be willing to do this 12-week study in which every week you'll meet with what we call a Ruachiatry coach, who was my nurse practitioner who trained in that, and see how this helps you. And during the whole 12 weeks, we can't change any of your medicine, and we can't change, if they're currently in psychotherapy, we can't change the frequency of that. If you're going every 2 weeks, you got to keep going every 2 weeks. So we wanted to keep some things constant. And what we found was that at the beginning of the study, these patients who are treatment resistant had a Beck depression inventory that was 32, which is in the severe range. By the end of the 12 weeks, the people who remained in the study, their Beck depression score had dropped to 14, which is in the mild range. So it had dropped 48% without any change in their medicine or psychotherapy,
Mm.
just doing this spiritual
So
approach.
just adding that part of it. Do you think
Absolutely.
do you think it's just if they do believe in something and adding the spiritual part of it? Do you think it's just giving them, like, if you were to put it in layman's term, one
Mhm.
phrase, is it because now they have hope and it's changing their energy and positivity towards it? Why do you think, is there more research of why that works?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's some research in that regard. I'll tell you my summary of the research in my opinion. What we found is that the only area of medicine that deals with spirituality at all is the field of addictionology. And in the 1930s, prior to that, alcoholism had a terrible, people just didn't do well with it. They became homeless and destitute, and it was horrible. And AA came about in the 1930s. And since that time, addictionology has embraced those 12 steps. And AA and Narcotics Anonymous, NA, have used those and kind of tailored them to their own, the patient's needs and that sort of thing. But I thought, since there's a lot of evidence for the efficacy of AA, what if we could take a 12-step approach to spirituality and make that into something that could treat people with physical illnesses, with psychological illnesses, and that's how I came up with the 12 steps of Ruachiatry. So they're based on AA principles, but it's not exactly the same. In fact, when I was coming up with these, I got in touch with the national AA headquarters in New York and talked with them and told them what I was doing. And they were supportive. They said, just make sure you put in there that you have no affiliation with AA whatsoever, and we don't condone this, or, that sort of thing. And so that's
Yeah,
obviously
so
a
it's basically
disclaimer
trying that approach for other areas of medicine and see
besides
if it
substance
also
abuse.
helps. Oh,
Right.
that's pretty genius. I'm curious how it will all play out in a couple of years from now. So congratulations on that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's huge to do something new and, that nobody has tried before. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
saw a vacuum there that I hope can help people. You asked about why that might be helpful to folks. Is it giving them hope? I think, yes, that's part of it. But the first part, if you look at 12 steps, is just recognizing that, hey, I'm sick. You have to accept that. And it's stronger than me, and I need help. You wouldn't be seeing a physician and taking medicine if you didn't need help. If you could do it yourself, you would have already done it. And then step two is that searching that we talked about. So now it's your responsibility. If you can't handle it yourself and you say, well, if there's a higher power somewhere, I ought to at least look into that, because if there's a higher power and he cares about me and made me, I need to go to the owner's manual and get that guy to help me. And you need to, that's your own responsibility to figure out what that is. Psychiatry does not impose any particular, belief system. In fact, I want it to be open to people of all different beliefs and try to support them where they are in their own spiritual journey.
Beautiful. Okay, see, we are running short on time. I just want to ask one last question in
Mhm,
regards to entrepreneurship with the integration of medicine and spirituality.
mhm.
I know it is getting to be talked about more and more, and there's more research how it really affects spirituality, how it really affects our health, our
Right.
wellness, our success, all of it. I know there is more research and more evidence how it's tied together. Now, as far as business, based on your personal opinion and your research, what opportunities do you think there are for entrepreneurs to either maybe invest into the technology or research or anything along that line?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've seen since I've been a psychiatrist is that there is, for better or worse, there's an increased need in our culture for therapists in
Oh,
psychiatric
yeah.
care, and that's the state of the world, right? It's the state of flux. It's probably never been this great in all the history of humanity. Things just change rapidly, and now with AI, they're changing even more. But with that comes uncertainty, right? Oh, geez, what if my job is taken by AI? What am I going to
Yeah,
do?
it's
And that sort of thing.
scary.
It is
It's
scary.
scary.
So the
Even
world,
this conversation, if AI fully has our face and our voices, is this really real? Right?
right? What's real
And
and what's not?
so it is scary and a lot of uncertainty. So what you're doing now, I could see how it's super important. And I think that's why I do hear more and more people, even in just my circle, that were never really religious or spiritual. They're talking about it. They're mentioning God. And I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I see a pattern. So I definitely see that something's gonna happen as far as people's mental health. We need to do something about it before it goes out of control.
Well, the spirit and the soul are intimately connected, and I don't think it's surprise to me that spirituality is becoming more important as our world is becoming more uncertain, more technological. We grasp for meaning. We say, well, wait a second, is scrolling, is that my meaning in life, or why am I here? What's my purpose? And I think people are searching for that transcendent meaning. And again, they need to find it for themselves and go on their own personal journey. But laziness in this regard. Is not going to be the solution. They got to do the hard work and roll up their sleeves and say, "What do I believe? Not what I was taught." I mean, sure, you should honor your parents, and if you came from a certain religious background, obviously that's great. But if you don't, you need to search it out. And I believe true seekers, honest seekers of truth, will find it.
Beautiful. Now, what is your last words of wisdom to our listeners, and where can they find more information about either your educational material or your business if they want to dive a little bit deeper?
Yeah. We have a website called www.hidden-medicine.com if you want to learn more about Ruachiatry and the book in particular. But yeah, as far as words of wisdom, if you have a God-given desire to do anything as an entrepreneur, go for it. Great ideas are put there for a reason, and you should always follow your dreams. And don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't do it. I've had people along the way tell me, "You're not going to do this. You're not going to do that." And I had a dream inside me that I think was put there by a spiritual entity much higher than myself. And I've held true to that. And he's held true to his end of the bargain and supporting me in my journey. So whatever's in your heart, go for it, do it with all your might, and serve other people. Right? It's not just entrepreneur isn't just about me making money. Money will come if you do things the right way, if you serve other people and see them as valuable and you're providing either products or services that genuinely help them. This is America. You'll make plenty of money, but that shouldn't be your ultimate goal.
Yes, I love how you put that, serve and money will come.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Dr. McCormick.
You're
I look
welcome.
forward to watching the book thrive and connecting with you down the line. Again, thank you for your time and your effort and your value that you're adding to this world with even this conversation. But until
Thanks
next
so much
time,
for having me. I enjoy it.
thank you. And thank you to our audience for always tuning in and being part of the conversation. Feel free to reach out with additional questions and go pick up a copy of the book, Hidden Medicine. You can find it anywhere and is already at pre-sale at Amazon. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day. Bye. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review this podcast. Follow and engage with us on social media under the Yegi Project. And if you're interested in being a guest, email info@theyegiproject.com. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes.